Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming your way. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I want to know how far this story has reached. No more waiting. Let's get into the video.
The stars above Myrris IV shimmered like frozen tears on black velvet, unmoving in the vacuum. The planet spun slowly beneath an amber-hued sky, its upper atmosphere laced with ionized dust that crackled faintly under solar winds. Beneath the orbital docks of Carthan Prime, hidden behind a weathered neon sign that simply read, "Repairs," was a workshop unlike any other. This was where Darian Sol had buried his past. A former Federation soldier, he now lived among pirates, traders, diplomats, and drifters. His hands, once trained to kill, were now known across the system for something far rarer: the uncanny ability to blend Terran and alien tech as if they were meant to coexist, a synthesis neither manual nor textbook could teach. His workshop reeked of soldered copper, ozone discharge, and the faint musk of old plastics. Screens hovered mid-air, displaying schematics with layers upon layers of interfaces in dozens of alien dialects. The air vibrated with soft electrical hums and the occasional spark from a malfunctioning drone. Darian worked alone. Always. He didn't ask questions, didn't talk politics, didn't wear medals. The only trace of his old life was the scar over his right eye, a burn mark from the siege of Varela, and the Federation dog tag he kept welded into the base of his workbench. A ghost of who he used to be. But machines didn't care about wars. They needed fixing. And Darian needed silence. That silence was broken the day she walked in. The chime above the door buzzed, a soft, almost apologetic sound, and in the doorway stood a young alien woman cloaked in deep blue, her skin a luminous violet hue that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Her eyes shimmered like nebulae. She said nothing. Darian glanced up, barely acknowledging her, then returned to calibrating a cracked grav core. She didn't leave. She simply stood, watching him with wide, curious eyes. And in that moment, though neither of them could know it yet, a quiet shift began in the fabric of fate, not with explosions, not with battles, but with the gentle hum of tools, the scent of solder, and a girl who didn't belong there. She returned the next day. Same hour, same quiet step, same luminous eyes filled with wonder. Kaeli, that was the name she finally offered, though not right away. For nearly a week, she sat in the corner of the workshop, silent, still, absorbing every movement Darian made like a scholar witnessing ancient magic. She didn't speak unless spoken to. When she did, her voice was soft, melodic, a hum beneath the static of the world. Her species, the Thalayan, were known across the sector for their noble castes, psionic sensitivity, and strict cultural codes. Most wouldn't even acknowledge a human outsider. And yet here she was, a young Thalayan girl with ceremonial tattoos still fresh on her wrists, fascinated by a mechanic covered in oil and grief. Darian didn't understand it, didn't try to. He let her stay. He worked. She watched. Hours passed like this, quiet except for the hiss of plasma welders, the tick of cooling circuits, and the occasional low murmur from Kaeli when she asked questions no one else dared ask. Why do you use a Terran heat core with a Varnix coil? Aren't they incompatible? Darian paused mid-solder, eyebrow lifting. He didn't expect such insight. They are, he grunted. But when they're forced to cooperate, they outperform every compatible pair on the market. Kaeli tilted her head, thoughtful, like enemies dancing. A chuckle escaped him, the first sound of amusement he'd made in months. Exactly. She started bringing things, broken emitter crystals, cracked transceivers, a tiny music sphere that had stopped playing, always small, always silent offerings, placed gently on his workbench like a student presenting homework to a reluctant teacher. One day, she brought him a gift, a Thalayan symbiote circuit, a ceremonial tool never given to outsiders. It was wrapped in living silk that shimmered with pale bioluminescence. For you, she said, her hands trembling slightly. You gave life to things I thought were dead. Darian took it, not with gratitude, not with sentiment, just respect. She never asked about the scar above his eye. never flinched when his voice turned cold or when his hands shook from war-born memories. In her silence, she understood, and in his silence, he began, just barely, to heal. Myrris IV was a light. Once every orbit, the inhabitants of the planet gathered under its twin moons to celebrate the festival of convergence, a vibrant, chaotic burst of sound, color, and harmony between species. Markets overflowed with off-world delicacies, banners written in hundreds of alphabets flapped in solar winds, and bioluminescent streamers drifted across the gravity-neutral squares like jellyfish in space. Kaeli had invited him, not with words, but with a look. One of those gazes that lingered just long enough to carry meaning, a silent plea woven with trust. Darian went. Against every instinct, he followed her into the night. The crowd parted like smoke as they walked. Some looked at him, a human among the elegance of Thalian nobility, with disdain, others with curiosity. He ignored them all. His eyes were only on Kaeli, who seemed to belong to the stars themselves. She danced through the celebration like a pulse of light, her laughter rising above the ambient music, her hands trailing through clouds of glowing spores. And Darian, for the first time since the war, he smiled without guilt. But joy is brief on border worlds. It happened in a blink, a tremor in the ground, a burst of energy in the sky. Screams scattered the crowd as a firework misfired, triggering a chain reaction. A spiraling explosion ripped through one of the upper towers, sending a shockwave across the plaza. People fled. Darian ran toward the smoke. He found her near the epicenter, buried beneath crystalline debris, motionless. Her skin had dulled. The glow in her eyes was gone. She was alive. But something was terribly wrong. Kaeli couldn't see. Her pupils didn't respond to light. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, whispering, "Why is everything gone?" Darian carried her through the chaos, heart pounding like the old battlefield drums of Earth. Medical drones swarmed. Thalian physicians hovered. Diagnoses were given in cold, clipped tones. Ocular nerve disruption. Total sensory detachment. No treatment. No hope. She would never see again. Not as she had. The festival light still burned in the sky. But for Kaeli, the world had gone dark. And for Darian, something inside him reignited. Not rage. Not sorrow. Defiance. They called it incurable. They spoke with authority, wearing robes woven from starlight and threads of tradition. The Thalian medics bowed to science as if it were prophecy. But Darian had seen miracles born not from knowledge, but from desperation. And he had been desperate before. Kaeli lay in recovery, her body intact, her mind still sharp. But her senses deadened. Her once luminous eyes now stared blankly into the void. Yet she didn't weep. She didn't scream. Her silence said more than any cry could. Darian didn't ask for permission. He worked. He sealed the workshop doors, locked the diagnostics grid, shredded every safety protocol. His hands moved like possessed tools, guided not just by training, but by some furious instinct, a will to rebuild what the universe had broken. Wires hummed. Neural blueprints flickered in the air. He drew from every system he had ever hacked, every weapon he'd ever rebuilt, every alien module he'd ever salvaged. Pieces of old Earth tech, sensor arrays from broken scout probes, echolocation fibers stolen from pirate gear, heat mapping gel from medical drones. He fused them all. He built a neural interface visor, not to restore her sight, but to redefine it. The device didn't rely on optical signals. It read fluctuations, thermal, electromagnetic, vibrational, and fed them directly into the neural matrix. Where her eyes had failed, this machine would make the unseen visible. He tested it on himself first. The world became a kaleidoscope of layers, whispers of heat, pulses of motion, sound waves blooming like flowers across metal surfaces. Overwhelming, beautiful, alive. He returned to her bedside. She lay still, her hands folded neatly, as if ready to be remembered, not saved. He knelt beside her, holding the visor like an offering. "No light, no lies," he murmured, "but something else, if you want it." Her fingers brushed his, trembled, then, slowly, nodded. The moment the device connected, her breath hitched, her body stiffened, and then she laughed, soft, disbelieving, awestruck. "I see everything," she whispered. Everything they never knew existed. Her hands reached for his face, not to find him, but to feel the heat of his skin, the energy around his chest, the rhythm of his pulse. And for the first time since the accident, her eyes, blind to light, filled with wonder again. Word spread fast on Myrris IV. Too fast. The House of Corin, proud, ancient, and bound by law, summoned Darian Sol under formal edict, not as a guest, not as a hero, as a violator. He stood alone in the crystalline hall of the Thalian High Chamber, beneath a dome that refracted starlight into burning columns of violet fire. All around him, nobles in living garments stared down with the cold gaze of tradition. Beside them, Kaeli's mother, Lady Nyara, sat in silence, her expression unreadable, carved from duty. Lord Corin himself descended the dais. His voice was sharp, like a blade scraped against glass. "You altered the natural path of our bloodline without consent. You interfered with sacred medical rites. You brought Terran instability into our sanctum." Darian didn't flinch. "I gave her back a world they took away." The nobles stirred, murmurs crackling like dry plasma. A holographic projection ignited between them, Kaeli's new vision, recorded directly from the visor's output. The court saw as she saw, pulses of heat in trees, the spectral signatures of energy between beings, the silent hum of the stars pressing against the sky. It was beyond sight, beyond law, beyond comprehension. Some called it beautiful, others, blasphemous. Lady Nyara rose. "My daughter was condemned to live in darkness," she said, "and yet here she is, standing among us, not broken, but evolved. This Terran may be reckless, but he gave her back more than vision." Kaeli, dressed in ceremonial silks adapted for her condition, stepped forward, visor glowing with soft blue light. Her presence silenced the room. "I don't see the world as you do anymore," she said. "I see its truth, its chaos, its fire, and I choose it." Corin's face tightened. "You speak of fire as though it doesn't burn." "It does," she replied, "but so does tradition when it forgets compassion." A hush. Then, a vote. The chamber lights dimmed. One by one, voices echoed. "Not guilty. Not guilty. Allied." The final declaration struck like thunder. Darian Sol was not only absolved, he was named Ally of House Corin, an honor never before bestowed on a human. As he walked out of the chamber, Kaeli at his side, Nyara lingered behind, her gaze no longer cold, but warm, complex. And watching Darian with a new kind of fire, honor means little in the dark. The ceremony had barely ended when the shadows stirred. Not everyone in the noble ranks welcomed Darian's acceptance. To some, it was sacrilege, a Terran outsider now bound to one of the oldest Thalian bloodlines. To others, it was opportunity. The House of Varnix had watched in silence during the trial, but silence in politics is never passive. Behind shimmering banners and smiles carved from protocol, they moved. The visor. That was the key. They didn't see a miracle. They saw a weapon. If a human could override Thalian neurobiology, what else could the device rewrite? Control emotion, thought, loyalty. The implications were staggering and dangerous. Varnix wanted it, and so Kaeli vanished. One evening, she failed to arrive at the new lab Darian was building for cross-species research. Messages went unanswered. Her locator tag pinged once, briefly, then disappeared entirely from the planetary grid. Darian knew instantly. He didn't wait for permission, didn't file formal inquiries. He traced energy trails, spliced into noble communication lines, and deployed old Federation subroutines he swore he'd never use again. In less than an hour, he had a name, Varnix, and a place, the Skylock Bastion, a fortress orbiting Myrris IV, disguised as a trade station but long rumored to house black site projects and covert bioengineering cells. He went to Lady Nyara. She was still Thalian, still bound by protocol, but something had changed. Her words, once wrapped in distance, now came closer to warmth, and something else he hadn't yet dared name. "My daughter." she said softly, is more than heir to Corin. She is proof that union is possible. That difference is not weakness. Then she looked him in the eyes. Bring her home. And if you must burn Varnix to the stars to do it, do not hesitate. Darian nodded once. Back in his workshop, he reopened crates sealed since the war. Pulsing EMP grenades, camo nodes, explosive decoys. He tore the visor's schematics into pieces, not because he feared Varnix would find it, because he had built a better version. And it was meant only for her. The Skylock bastion hung in orbit like a predator's fang, its spires bristling with weapon arrays disguised as docking arms. To traders, it was a way station. To spies, a labyrinth. To Darian, it was a cage, and Kaeli was inside. He approached in a patched freighter, its transponder forged from 20 different ID codes. The hull rattled with every docking clamp, masking the silence of his heartbeat. He was no longer the mechanic in oil-stained gloves. He was the Federation soldier again, but sharpened by exile, unbound by command. Once inside, the plan unfolded like choreography. First, chaos. He planted pulse bombs along the power conduits. Not enough to destroy, just enough to stutter the lights, to twist security sensors blind. The bastion groaned as if it sensed its own betrayal. Second, ghosting. Magnetic smoke grenades painted corridors with shimmering fields, confusing motion detectors and making guards stumble as their armor read false data. Darian slipped past like a shadow, a phantom with iron resolve. Third, the strike. Varnix soldiers dragged Kaeli into a chamber lined with surgical restraints, the visor clamped in their hands. She stood tall despite her capture, her blind eyes glowing faintly from within. They wanted her as a specimen, a key, an experiment. Darian didn't give them the chance. The first guard fell before his rifle even powered up. The second collapsed as a gravity snare snapped his legs sideways. The third never saw the blade coming. Darian moved like he was back on Varela, but this time the mission wasn't conquest. It was rescue. Kaeli heard the chaos, the explosions, the screams, the hum of his breath as he pulled the restraints away. She reached for him, her hands trembling. You came. I'll always come, he said, and meant it. The walls shook. Varnix reinforcements surged in, armored and furious, but Darian had counted on that. He triggered the final sequence. Hidden drones he had seeded earlier lit the chamber with live broadcast. Across Myrris IV, across the Council's channels, the truth streamed. Varnix abducting Kaeli, dissecting technology for war. The enemy was unmasked, and Darian had her back. They fled into the freighter, smoke and fire chasing their trail. As the bastion burned, the system watched, and the truth could not be silenced. The freighter drifted through silent void, its patched hull glowing faintly with re-entry burns. Darian sat in the cockpit, eyes scanning empty space, every nerve still wired from the escape. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. The kind soldiers learn when they survive too much. Behind him, Kaeli rested. Her new visor pulsed faintly, alive with the rhythms of her adapted senses. She traced the ship with her fingers, seeing not its form, but its energy. The hum of power cells, the faint warmth of coolant lines, the heartbeat of a human who would not abandon her. For days she had been a prisoner. For years he had been one. To ghosts, to silence, to scars. Now, both were free, at least for a moment. Lady Niara boarded at the Corin Enclave. She came in regal, but her eyes betrayed a storm. When she saw Kaeli alive, she cradled her daughter with fierce dignity, a mother's relief buried beneath the discipline of a matriarch. But her gaze kept slipping toward Darian. Later, when Kaeli slept, Niara sought him out. They stood in the engineering bay, shadows dancing across bulkheads alive with afterglow from the battle. She looked at him the way commanders look at soldiers who have done the impossible, with respect, with gratitude, and with something else she tried to conceal. You risked everything, she said softly. Not for glory, not for politics. For her. Darian shrugged. Someone had to. Her lips curved in a smile. Fragile yet dangerous. No, not someone. You. Silence pressed between them, heavier than armor. For once, Darian didn't look away. He saw her not as a noble, not as Kaeli's mother, but as a woman bound by duty, standing in the ruins of a war she never fought but always managed. The tension burned hotter than plasma. Nyara reached, almost without thinking, brushing her hand against his scarred knuckles. A fleeting contact, yet in that touch, a universe cracked open. "Do you know what you've done to us?" she whispered. "To me?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence said everything. And in that unspoken moment, the human soldier and the alien matriarch both understood. War wasn't the only fire that could consume them. The Koran Enclave had never opened its vaults to outsiders. Its archives were a tapestry of forbidden sciences, sacred technologies, and relics too dangerous to trust in open hands. But after the Varnik's betrayal, the house had little choice. And after Darian's defiance, they had little doubt. He was no longer just a mechanic, no longer just a soldier. He was an ally, bound to Koran by oath and deed. So the lab was his. Deep beneath the crystalline spires of Myrris IV, the chamber pulsed with hybrid systems, Terran alloys fused with Thalian neural weaves, Koran symbiotics spliced with Earth-born circuitry. It was alive, humming with languages of metal and mind. Kaeli moved among the machines with her visor, not as a patient but as a partner. She described what she sensed, how sound bloomed as color, how heat shaped landscapes invisible to others, how the very breath of reactors pulsed like a heartbeat through the floor. Every insight became blueprint, every failure became spark. Nyara watched from the balcony above, at first as matriarch, ensuring order, then as confidant, ensuring Darian never carried the burden alone. Their exchanges grew longer, warmer, layered with unspoken trust and the quiet heat of something forbidden but undeniable. For the first time in centuries, the Enclave saw humans not as brutes or laborers, but as creators. Darian's workshop became a crucible where differences weren't erased but woven together. Prototypes emerged, medical devices that healed across species lines, navigation systems that read intent instead of input, translators that sang with resonance rather than stuttered with code. Not everyone approved. Whispers still lingered in the higher halls, that Koran was gambling its honor, that the Terran's presence would invite ruin. Yet for every doubt, there was proof. Kaeli's laughter as she mapped the world anew. Nyara's steel voice declaring, "Progress is not treason." Darian's hands, building not weapons this time, but futures. It wasn't easy. It wasn't safe, but it was real. And in the dim light of the lab, as machines pulsed with impossible life, Darian realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't fixing broken things. He was building something whole. The laboratory was quiet now. Not dead, but alive in a gentler way, its walls glowing with the faint pulse of technologies never meant to coexist, now woven into a single rhythm. The air smelled of metal and ozone, but also of something warmer, the breath of a future struggling to be born. Darian stood at the console, a simple recording device hovering before him. He wore no uniform, no crest, no insignia of house or federation. Just his work jacket, still streaked with solder stains and scars of battles fought long before Myrris IV. Kaeli sat nearby, visor glowing, sketching with trembling fingers on a hollow slate. Strange shapes only she could truly understand. Lady Nyara lingered in the shadows, her eyes never leaving Darian, her expression equal parts fire and silence. He pressed the console. The recorder chimed. His voice filled the chamber, steady, weathered, unmistakably human. This isn't about empires, or houses, or wars. It's about one girl who refused to stop asking questions, one alien who sat in silence until the silence broke, and one stubborn soldier who couldn't accept the word impossible. He paused, breath catching for just a moment. I've fought enough battles to know weapons don't save worlds. Empires don't save worlds. People do. And sometimes all it takes is one gesture, a hand held out in defiance, a gift wrapped in silk, a voice saying, "I see you." Kaeli lifted her head, blind to the light, but not to the weight of his words. Nyara's eyes shimmered faintly, betraying what no court would ever see. Darian leaned closer to the console. His final words were softer, but they carried farther than any broadcast. Maybe empathy is the only technology we haven't managed to break yet. And maybe, just maybe, It's the one that will save us all. The recorder blinked once, sealing his message. The chamber fell silent. Outside, Myrris IV spun beneath its amber sky, a world scarred by conflict but stitched together by something rare, the refusal to give up on one another. And in the endless dark of space, that simple message began its journey, a beacon not of conquest, not of despair, but of connection.